Hi everyone, and welcome to our second ELL strategy focus of the year. First, I'd like to thank everyone who's made an effort to implement more comprehensible input our October ELL focus. Before beginning with our November focus, I'd like to remind you of some simple ways that you can increase your comprehensible input. First, speak at a reasonable rate and give information as precisely as possible. Take a minute to read and compare these two ways of communicating information during a transition. Obviously, the instructions in the second bubble are a lot clearer, but too many times we find ourselves giving directions more similarly to what's in the first bubble because we haven't thought through the most important information that we need to communicate. Second, another way to increase comprehensible input is by co-creating anchor charts during lessons and then keeping them up around the classroom for the duration of your unit. I found these charts in Anaïs Salazar's classroom, and you can imagine how useful they are for students who can't quite remember the meaning of the science vocabulary that she's referring to or the nonfiction text feature she's asking them to talk about. These charts are reinforcing the comprehensible input she's already given them. Third, use your document camera and projector so that students can see and hear what you are talking about. Bill Adsley has taken the time to create a simple PowerPoint for a unit on instrument families that he teaches every year. His students will be able to see different examples of instruments in each family and will have a visual reference as he talks about the different features of each instrument. Again, if you'd like some help coming up with ideas about how to improve your input, please get in touch. This month, I would like us to focus on providing meaningful, scaffolded opportunities for student interaction. I chose this strategy because interaction, or you might call it comprehensible output, naturally follows after students have received comprehensible input. Both meaningful and scaffolded are highlighted for a reason here. Many of us have taken a foreign language class in the past. In those classes, most of us have probably had the experience of going around the circle, each one taking a turn conjugating some form of "John rode the bicycle" or some meaningful or meaningless phrase that had no context and little usefulness to us once we walked out of class. We want the interaction that students have to come out of an important question and to be related to an immediate task in the context of a larger assignment. If you've taken a foreign language class, you've probably also experienced the terror of being called on and having no idea what to say in that language, not having the tools or support you needed to participate successfully. We want to avoid both of these scenarios for our students. That's why it's important for the interaction in our classroom to be both meaningful and scaffolded. So now, some ideas for improving the quality of student interaction in your classroom. Most all of us do turn-in talks at some point during our lesson, which allows students to process the information that they are receiving from our instruction. This is great, but how many times have you seen one student dominate the discussion or a pair just sit there not sure how to proceed? To make your turn-in talks as effective as possible for language development and comprehension, try these ideas. First, consider making turn-in talks think turn-in talks. Even just giving 10 seconds to your students to process internally before answering will help not only your English language learners, but your introverts, speaking from personal experience, to produce more language in their answers. It will also help your students who tend to just blurt out the first thing that comes to their mind to give higher quality answers. Second, make sure you're intentionally pairing students. Of course, all of our classrooms don't work out this neatly, but most of our classrooms look something like this, with some low proficiency students, a lot of middle proficiency students, and then some high proficiency students. Make sure that your students are intentionally partnered so that wherever possible, lower proficiency students have a medium proficiency peer, and other medium proficiency students have a high proficiency peer as a partner. In these scenarios, partner A would be the student with the higher proficiency level. If you have a newcomer or a very low proficiency student in your class, you may need to make a triad, as you see in the scenario on the right. Assign the higher student as partner A and the lower student as partner B, so that when you pose a more complex question, you can discreetly have the more proficient partner answer first by asking partner A to start, and then that student will be able to model a strong answer for partner B before they make their contribution. By intentionally partnering students of different language proficiencies, you can make your turn and talk time a language modeling time as well as a comprehension time. But there are plenty of other opportunities in our classrooms for interaction besides turn and talks. Whole class discussions can be a great way to help students practice academic language and to deepen comprehension. I know some of you are thinking, I've tried having whole class discussions before and no one really participates. Students just sit there. While I acknowledge that some of this lack of participation is due to lack of motivation, I think a large part of it is also due to intimidation. Students don't know how to engage in this type of discussion. I remember my first quarter at the University of Washington in graduate school. I don't remember what my first class was, but I do remember being completely overwhelmed by the type of discussion that was happening in that class. There were parts of the discussion that I didn't understand, but mostly it was just a completely unfamiliar type of interaction. Fortunately, with 17 years of education behind me and the fact that I'm a native English speaker, I learned pretty quickly how to engage and where to find points of entry into that discussion. But for our students who are not native English speakers or don't have that type of educational background, they need explicit instruction in academic discussion. It might not seem like it, since many of our students have plenty to say in social situations, but remember that social and academic language are two very different things. So what might this type of instruction look like? At a primary level, the teaching could be as simple as this. After your mini lesson, you choose an academic phrase to help students practice the concept you just taught and model it yourself. Then, a few students have the chance to model it in the whole group discussion with support from the teacher. Next, students can use the phrase in partners to gain practice, and finally, the phrase can be used independently during classroom discussions with teacher reinforcement. Of course, there are many different language and comprehension levels in your classroom, so differentiating like this will help your students at many different levels to advance in their language skills. For intermediate classrooms, you might select academic phrases such as these and go through the same process as the primary example, using 1 or 2 per lesson. You can imagine if this happens as part of most lessons, by the end of the year, students will have built up quite a repertoire of academic language that can be applied to a variety of texts and subject areas. Of course, this will take some intentional effort by you to keep circling back to these phrases and giving huge encouragement to students when they choose to use them independently. This book is an excellent resource for the reading workshop and includes a whole chapter on supporting student conversations. That whole chapter can be found on Collab. First, go to Departments, then Language Learning, ELL Instructional Resources, English Language Development, and finally scroll down to Reading Strategies 12, Supporting Student Conversations. This chapter goes into depth on some of the nuances of quality group discussion and gives detailed lessons on how to teach them to students. You can see here some of the nuances that are listed. And here, an example of a lesson. This particular one is on saying back what you heard. It gives you the academic phrase to have students practice, some language that you could use during your lesson, and even a simple anchor chart to help students remember. I could see something like this being used during a strategy group or during a teaching time with a book club at the higher levels. So, in summary, some ways to increase student interaction in your classroom are: use think turn and talks, intentionally pair students so that lower proficiency students are seeing a higher proficiency language model, model and have students practice academic phrases, and explicitly teach the nuances of academic discussion. For some of you, the strategies I'm presenting are old news. You've been using these strategies in your classroom for quite a while. If this is the case for you, please let me know. I would love to use you as a model for other teachers to come and observe. For others of you, you know these strategies but haven't necessarily been putting them into practice. If this is you, make November the month that you start trying out some of these interaction strategies in your classroom. And for a few of you, these may be all new strategies and very overwhelming. If this is you, please get in touch. I would love to work with you to help you put some of them into practice. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned for the next slide to take a short survey. Now that you've watched the video, click on the link to complete the following 3-question, plus your name, survey for a chance at an hour of coverage in your classroom. I will put everyone's name who has completed the survey into a hat, draw one name, and that person will receive a full hour of coverage on either Wednesday or Thursday at an hour of your choosing. I'm hoping this will be convenient if you need to finish up report cards or prepare for conferences. If the link does not work, then you will go ahead and have to type it into your browser. Thank you.